Thank you, Comrade Martin, and it's indeed an honor and a pleasure to be able to speak to this meeting this afternoon. When the Socialist Equality Party initiated this campaign, the presidential campaign of my running mate Niles Nemeth and also Naomi Spencer and myself, we said the purpose of our campaign would be to alert the working class of the grave dangers of war, and to give a voice to the working class and the real interests of workers and youth, and to build a leadership in preparation for what we anticipated to be the growth of social opposition and class struggle in the aftermath of these elections. We said our aim was to build a genuine socialist leadership to wage war on war, inequality, and the capitalist system. Now, I think the turnout to today's conference is an indication of the growth of anti-capitalist sentiment, the deep anger over war, the impossibility of articulating the interests of masses of working people through these decrepit, corporate-controlled parties, and the desire of a new generation to fight to put an end to war and fight for a society based on equality. I do believe that while our forces still remain small, that those who are gathered here today, in fact, speak and are the advance guard for tens and tens of millions throughout the United States and internationally. Now, the descent of the US presidential elections into scandal-mongering, palace intrigues, and what amounts to psychological warfare to deaden the consciousness of the working class is, of course, a degrading spectacle, but it also has a real purpose. First, bury the real issues before the working class, the danger of escalating war, and the consequences of the deepening US and world economic crisis. Second is to conceal the fact that whoever wins these elections, and despite their tactical differences, both Clinton and Trump are committed to a ruling class agenda of escalating military violence around the world and a war against workers and youth in the United States. As our other speakers have explained, Clinton and Trump are the most despised presidential candidates in US history. The fact that the American people are left with a fascistic billionaire who wants to divert social anger down the path of anti-immigrant chauvinism, and a multimillionaire, political insider, and the favored candidate of Wall Street, the Pentagon, and the CIA, exposes the terminal crisis of capitalist democracy. It is impossible for workers and youth to express our aspirations and our interests within a political system controlled by the super rich and committed to the narrow and antisocial interests of a corporate and financial aristocracy. Whoever wins the election on Tuesday, and perhaps as has been indicated, the issue may very well not be settled by Tuesday, the next administration will be considered illegitimate from the beginning and will be crisis-ridden. It will take the reins of a country mired in economic slump, entangled in intractable geopolitical contradictions all over the world, and confronting a rising tide of social discontent and the first stirrings of open class conflict. The ruling class and its political representatives are well aware of their political isolation. They realize, despite Bernie Sanders' best efforts to convince workers and young people that they can fight the billionaire class by supporting Clinton and the Democrats, that political radicalization and anti-capitalist sentiments among workers and young people must and will find expression outside of the two big business parties, and they fear the growing popularity of socialism. A recent poll commissioned by an anti-communist lobby group in Washington found to its great chagrin that Marx's aphorism, from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs, was far more popular among young people than various sayings of the free market guru Milton Friedman, even the Bible, or sayings from Bernie Sanders. Incapable and unwilling to resolve the deep social problems in America, the ruling class looks to war as a means to direct outward the deep social tensions within the United States, to a new external enemy, Russia, China, and any others on an ever-growing list. That is what the endless war propaganda about the war on terror, the alleged aggression by Russia and China is all about, and the discussion floated by Clinton to establish a national service. That is a prelude to a draft. The internal documents and discussions that have been cited by Andrew about mass casualties, that the next wars will not be the so-called cakewalks of bombing impoverished countries, but countries which will fire back, that there will be mass casualties, and therefore it is necessary to have what they say mass mobilization. That is the so-called volunteer army, the conscript, economic conscript army, which has been deployed again and again, is not sufficient for the number of boots on the ground and the number of cadavers that are required by American imperialism in its new wars. And there will be an effort, and General McChrystal, a close ally of Hillary Clinton, is one of the biggest advocates of a, quote, national service, because they express that the growth of social inequality has so deeply divided the American society that the ruling elites have no credibility, that they need national service, as McChrystal said, to bind young people to the nation. Now, in the scores of meetings and countless discussions Naomi Spencer, Niels Nemeth, and I have had with factory workers, coal miners, teachers, striking nurses, and college and high school youth across the country, we have encountered a real hatred of war and the irrational squandering of millions of lives and trillions of dollars on the mad quest for U.S. global domination. Everywhere, there is a growing interest in genuine socialism and a feeling, as one worker told me yesterday, that it's common sense that the working class, which produces society's wealth, should control that wealth. The most irrational idea in the minds of workers and youth is that they should wage war against their class brothers and sisters, workers in China or Russia, who have families to feed, who have the same problems as American workers do, yet they are being told inevitably to slaughter one another to see which gang of transnational corporations and banks will rule the world. The same contradictions of the capitalist system, the nation-state system, the outmoded nation-state system, the irrational subordination of all of human life to the profit drive of a tiny handful of the population, the same contradictions that give rise to war are also the impulses for the growth of social opposition within the United States and around the world. And the real possibility to build a genuine mass and socialist political party of the American working class, which rejects nationalism, which understands that the enemy is not the workers of other countries, but the capitalist class at home. It is precisely in the period of war which the ruling class is, in fact, faces its greatest dilemma. How is it possible to convince millions to sacrifice their lives and their children and their resources for wars for profit? A movement of the working class that opposes that insists that social resources, the trillions, and a study was recently done by Brown University that found nearly $5 trillion has been spent since 2001 on the wars, on homeland security, on the borrowing costs for wars, on veteran pay. You take that nearly $5 trillion and you add to it the $10 trillion, that's just the ordinary defense spending, and you come up with $15 trillion since 2001. That is enough to eliminate the student loan debt of every youth in this country 15 times over. It is enough to put an end to the lead poisoning in Flint, to the poverty in Detroit. It's enough to hire 50 million teachers and nurses and public sector workers for 3 years at a salary of $100,000. Only if the working class takes political power in our own hands is it possible for us to decide how the wealth that we create is to be allocated, how society's resources are to be utilized in a rational and egalitarian fashion. Now, that is the impetus for the development of the class struggle. Now, Obama was sold to the working people of all races. He was sold by the liberal and pseudo-left forces, the official left, that said that given his skin color, he would be a transformative president. He would end the wars that Bush had carried out, and he would be far more sensitive to the needs of the oppressed. Well, in fact, reality, the experiences of millions have seen the falseness and the lies of such claims. Obama escalated the Afghan and Iraq wars, intensified the drone killings in Pakistan, Somalia, and Yemen, and in the aftermath of the Egyptian revolution, armed the Islamic fundamentalists to bring sectarian civil wars to Libya and Syria. As Time magazine aptly noted, Barack Obama's most far-reaching achievement has been to strip out any remaining legal limits in the president's power to wage war. By the time Obama hit the dais at Oslo to accept the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009, our 44th president had already launched more drone strikes than 43 carried out during 2 full terms. Since then, he's launched 2 undeclared wars, and as Obama bragged in a speech last year defending the Iran deal, bombed no fewer than 7 countries. He is, as it's been noted, the first 2-term president in U.S. history who has constantly been at war. Now, when they say Clinton is more hawkish, then you have to contrast that with Mr. Obama, who everyone knows is no dove. Now, domestically, Obama funneled trillions of dollars to the Wall Street banks, restored the profitability of the auto industry by slashing the wages of young workers in half. 20 billionaires in the United States now own as much wealth as the bottom 150 million people. And the rich not only enjoy untold wealth and privilege, they live longer. The life expectancy gap between the richest and poorest Americans averages almost 15 years for men and 10 years for women. I think there's the figure that Patrick Martin cited today in the perspective that suicide among young people takes a greater death toll than car accidents is a damning indictment. And it's also a damning indictment of all the proponents of pseudo-left politics who claim that the problem in America is not the class divide and the exploitation of black, white, and immigrant workers, but so-called white privilege. Tell that to the millions of workers of Flint or Appalachia or anywhere else. What exists in American society is class rule and class exploitation. The the crisis of American capitalism and the decades-long social counter-revolution carried out by the American ruling class has produced levels of social inequality rivaled only by the years preceding the Great Depression of the 1930s. When the Workers' League in the United States, the predecessor of the Socialist Equality Party, began the process of forming the SEP in 1995-96, it pointed to the, quote, dominant feature in political life, the widening gap between a small percentage of the population that enjoys unprecedented wealth and the broad mass of the working population that lives in varying degrees of economic uncertainty and distress. Recognition of the revolutionary significance of the fight for equality was embodied in the name that we chose, the Socialist Equality Party. The social anger that is generated by this inequality is finding a distorted expression in the support of Trump, a billionaire who claims to be championing the interests of the economically distressed. His closest advisor is a man by the name of Wilbur Ross, who bought the auto parts industry, the steel industry, the coal mining industry, only to flip them and make billions of dollars. He can only get away with posturing as a friend of the little guy because of the function of the so-called left in America, which is oblivious to the social crisis and fixated on identity politics and the strivings of an upper middle class social stratum which only wants more influence and more affluence. As for the trade unions, such as the United Auto Workers, the United Mine Workers, the United Steel Workers, they long ago ceased to be organizations of the working class and function as the enforcers of wage cuts, speed up labor discipline, and the spreading of nationalist poison. To try to convince workers that our enemies are not the capitalists at home, but the Chinese and Russian workers and the Mexican workers. The artificial suppression of the class struggle by the unions, which kept work stoppages to the lowest level since the end of World War II during the 8 years of the Obama administration, facilitated the enrichment of those at the top, but that artificial suppression of the class struggle only guarantees when it erupts, it will erupt with that much greater force. The recent period has seen the reemergence of the class struggle in the United States as part of a wider growth of working class resistance internationally, including strikes in China, in India, and South Korea. The working class has not disappeared, as the demoralized fake lefts and academics claim. It has in fact grown by 1.5 billion in the last 2 decades. The strikes by Philadelphia transit workers. By the way, the Philadelphia transit system is seeking an injunction to end the strike because they claim it will disrupt Election Day. They're utilizing the sort of panic crisis around the elections to strip workers of their right to strike in a city where the Democratic Party has waged school closing, cuts on social programs, and attacks on transit workers. The main issue in that strike, as so many others, is the effort to shift healthcare costs onto the backs of workers. Recently, there have been strikes of Pittsburgh symphony musicians, video game voice actors in Los Angeles, and Minnesota nurses, cafeteria workers at Harvard, professors at Pennsylvania State University, and wildcat strikes by Detroit teachers, and a rebellion by auto workers last year against the United Auto Workers. Now, while Clinton and her reactionary liberal and pseudo-left allies redouble their efforts to promote race and gender politics and attribute the support to Trump to the supposed racism of the white working class, the class struggle is proving the exact opposite. on picket lines in Minneapolis. In Philadelphia, there are black workers, there are white workers, there are native-born workers, there are immigrant workers. Society under capitalism has divided, as Karl Marx put it, into, quote, two great hostile camps, into two great classes facing each other, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. That is, the capitalists and the working class. In the face of demands for greater austerity and sacrifice in time of war, the efforts to utilize anti-democratic methods to suppress political dissent, the class struggle will only grow in the coming period. The intervention of the Socialist Equality Party has been to prepare a leadership for the coming struggles that are before us in the United States and throughout the world. We insist that the working class must adopt the conception that we have social rights, that the working class has to have the right to a good paying job, to health care, to high quality and free education, to the access to culture, to access to leisure time, and to access to a comfortable future. We also insist that workers and the younger generation has to have a future free of war and state repression. But these social rights cannot be achieved by appealing to the conscience of the ruling elites. War, as inequality, is rooted not in the greed of this or that politician or bourgeois, but in the nature of the capitalist system, in the outmoded system of private ownership and the division of the world into competing and rival nation states. The ruling elites of today will no more decide to step away and give up their wealth and power than appeals to the old slaveocracy in 1860 could have convinced the slave owners to give up their wealth and property. This is an irreconcilable struggle between the working class and the capitalist class. The ruling elites are aware. They're preparing for war. They're preparing for state repression. The working class must make preparations and build a mass political and socialist party that unites the working class to seize the ill-gotten wealth of the financial elites, to put under the public and democratic control the vast technological and productive capacity of society, and to allocate the immense wealth created by the global working class to meet human need, not private profit. Now, we do indeed face major political challenges in the aftermath of these elections, regardless of who wins. The various pseudo-lefts are all talking about continuing Sanders' revolution by forcing Hillary Clinton to abide by the most, quote, progressive Democratic Party platform in history. And they're seeking the right amount of ingredients to build their coalition. A little bit of Bernie's socialism, a little bit of Black Lives Matter, a little bit of the trade union bureaucracy, but all of it is aimed as a trap for the working class, no less than the Sanders campaign was. And in the end, they will utilize identity politics in the move for war, because after all, the U.S. military is now being branded as the most diverse and integrated and tolerant military apparatus the world has ever seen. There are even magazine articles. In the Newsweek magazine had a great feature on women in the CIA and how they have now gained tremendously, and there is even a lesbian and gay faction within the CIA. The working class must reject such politics. It must fight to unite every section. It must unite all of the struggles that confront the working people against war, against inequality, against police killing, yes, against racism and discrimination. But it must unite to put an end to the source of all those ills, and that is the capitalist class. The Socialist Equality Party and our sister parties throughout the world and the International Committee of the Fourth International are the only parties that oppose war, because we are the only parties that unite the working class against the capitalist system. And in the coming weeks and months, we must turn our battalions into stronger and stronger battalions of class-conscious, international fighters for socialism. And that's what this afternoon's meeting was for. This is what our campaign was for. And this is a very proper meeting that expresses the transition from our election campaign to the fight to build a mass socialist political party of the working class to prepare the struggles for the aftermath of the elections. Thank you very much.